Someone had bought balloons. 3 of them, mylar, the kind that hold their shape for weeks. They were tied to the back of a chair with curling ribbon, and they turned slowly in the air conditioning, catching light. One said, "Welcome home," in silver letters. One was shaped like a star. The third was just a balloon, round and gold, without text, which I found myself returning to throughout the evening because it wanted nothing from me. I stood in my own living room and looked at the balloons, and someone handed me a drink. My friend Reyes had organized it. This was apparent from the first moment. The arrangement of it, the particular combination of people who wouldn't have thought to call each other independently, but who Reyes would have contacted in sequence, working down a mental list. There were 11 people in the apartment. Some I'd known for years, some I knew through other people. One woman I recognized but could not immediately place and eventually located as someone from a former job, maybe 4 years ago, who I'd liked well enough, but who I hadn't seen since. Everyone had brought something. The kitchen counter held a topography of contribution: 2 bottles of wine, a thing of sparkling water, a store-bought cake still in its plastic clamshell, a wheel of cheese with crackers fanned around it, a dip of some kind with vegetables, a small arrangement of flowers that someone had put in a glass because I don't own a vase. The apartment smelled like other people. Coats and perfume and the particular warmth of a room with more bodies in it than usual. I stood in it and tried to locate myself. Reyes found me near the bookshelf. She hugged me for a long time, which I let happen. Her hugs have always been thorough, the kind that require both parties to stop doing anything else. I put my arms around her and she said into my shoulder, "I'm so glad you're here." I said, "I know, me too." She pulled back and looked at me the way she does, direct and assessing, and whatever she saw she accepted, because she didn't say anything else about it. She asked if I'd eaten anything, and I said not yet, and she went to the counter and made me a plate without asking what I wanted, which was the right approach. I held the plate and stood near the bookshelf, and people came to me in 1s and 2s. My colleague Pham was the first. She said she'd been thinking about me since she heard. She said the office hadn't been the same. She said my plant was doing well, that she'd been watering it, and this detail, my plant on my desk being watered by someone else, landed somewhere specific that I couldn't name immediately. I said, "Thank you for doing that." She said, "Of course." She looked at me with the expression I was already learning to recognize, a mixture of relief and something else, something that needed my confirmation. Like she'd been carrying a version of me in her mind, the worst version, the version that didn't come back, and now that I was standing in front of her, she needed me to participate in replacing it. I smiled. She smiled. She squeezed my arm and went toward the cheese. There were speeches, not formal ones. Reyes didn't tap a glass. But over the course of the first hour, 3 separate people said things in the general direction of the group that functioned as speeches. Relatively brief, aimed at me, received with murmurs and a small clustered applause that moved through the room like weather. The first was Reyes, who said she wanted to say something quickly, just that she was grateful we were all here, and that some of us had been through something that reminded her that the people in this room mattered to her, and she just wanted to say that out loud. Applause. Someone said, "Hear, hear." The second was a man named Gil, who I've known since graduate school, and who tends toward formality in emotional situations, which I've always found endearing. He raised his glass and said that he didn't want to make a big thing of it, but that he'd spent some time recently thinking about what it would mean not to have this person in his life, and that the answer was worse, significantly worse, and that he was glad the answer could stay hypothetical. More applause. Someone touched my shoulder. The third was shorter. The woman from my former job, whose name came back to me mid-speech as Dominique, said she knew she and I hadn't been in touch much lately, and she hoped that was okay that she'd come, and Reyes had said it was fine, and she just wanted to say that hearing about it had made her think about how you lose touch with people, and sometimes you don't get another chance, and she was glad in this case there was another chance. She looked at me when she said that last part. I nodded. I held my drink with both hands. Everyone was looking at me with some warmth and expectation, and I understood that I was supposed to say something, and I said, "Thank you all for being here. This means a lot," which was the truest thing I could produce at that moment and also the minimum required, and I could feel both of those things about it simultaneously. More applause. Someone refilled my glass. The cake was chocolate. Someone had written on it in white frosting, a short phrase I won't repeat because it belonged to this room and these people, and the particular kindness of the gesture, which was real. Reyes lit a candle and they sang. Not Happy Birthday, a modified version, something someone had clearly workshopped, and by the end of it, people were laughing at the improvised lyrics and I was laughing too, or doing the thing that looked like laughing, which from the inside felt like a slight delay, like I was watching myself respond and responding on a short lag. The cake was good. I ate 2 bites and put the plate down on the coffee table. Around the second hour, the gathering loosened. Conversations broke into smaller ones. Someone put music on low. The woman I recognized from the former job, Dominique, found me near the window, and we talked, genuinely talked, for about 20 minutes about things that had nothing to do with why we were gathered. Her sister had moved abroad. She'd changed jobs twice since we'd worked together. She was thinking about getting a dog. I told her about my sister's closet reorganization project because it was the most recent extended thing I'd done, and it came naturally, and she laughed and said that sounded oddly satisfying, and I said it was, genuinely. And for those 20 minutes I was almost just a person at a party talking to someone. Then Gil came over and put his arm around my shoulders and said he hoped I knew how many people were rooting for me, and the 20 minutes ended, and I was the survivor again. By 9:30 people were beginning to collect their coats. The goodbyes took another 40 minutes, which is the math of 11 people each taking 4 minutes to leave, each goodbye containing its own small ceremony. The hug, or the handshake, the repeated glad you're here, the specific eye contact that meant something extra without being able to carry the extra thing into words. Reyes stayed to help clean up. We moved around the kitchen without speaking much, consolidating leftovers, breaking down the cake box, rinsing glasses. The balloons reflected the overhead light. The gold one turned slowly. She said, "How are you doing?" "Actually," I said, "actually fine, I think." She looked at me. I said, "Tired." She said, "That makes sense." She hugged me again at the door, another thorough one, and said to call her. I said I would. She left and I closed the door and stood in the apartment that still smelled like other people. The balloons were there, the flowers in the glass, a third of the cheese remaining on the counter, the crackers slightly soft now. 11 people had come to celebrate the fact that I was alive. They had bought things and made things and said things and meant all of it, completely. The kindness in the room had been real as anything I knew how to measure. I leaned against the door and looked at the room and checked for gratitude the way you check a pocket for your keys. What I found instead was a tiredness that went further in than tired usually goes. Something that the 2 hours and the speeches and the cake and the genuine laughter with Dominique had not touched. Something that all the warmth in the room had moved around without entering. I was glad they had come. I was glad it was over. I couldn't find a clean distinction between those two things, and standing in the quiet apartment, I stopped trying. The card arrived on Monday. A large envelope, cream-colored, with my name in Reyes's handwriting. Inside, a card with a watercolor cover, something botanical, and signatures filling both interior pages, 23 of them, some with notes. I knew most of the names. A few I placed only by context. 2 I couldn't place at all, which meant Reyes had reached further than I'd known, into some outer ring of people who felt connected to the event in a way I didn't have full visibility into. The notes said variations of the same things. So glad you're okay. Thinking of you. You're so strong. One person had drawn a small sun in the margin. Another had written 3 sentences about their own experience of hearing the news, how it had stopped them, how it had made them call their mother. I read all of it. Then I put the card on the kitchen counter where I could see it and made coffee and stood with my back to the counter and looked at the room. I knew I should feel something proportional to 23 signatures. I checked for it honestly. What I found was a mild warmth, brief, like a patch of sun through a window that moves on before you can position yourself in it. I left the card on the counter. I drank my coffee. I went to work. At work, there was a second card. This one had been organized by Marcus, apparently, and sat on my desk when I arrived, propped against my monitor. More signatures, significant overlap with the first, but enough new names to constitute a second document of the same general sentiment. My plant was there, recently watered, healthy. Someone had put a small potted succulent next to it that hadn't been there before. A gift without a note. Anonymous. I sat down and put both cards side by side and looked at them, and then turned them both slightly so they weren't directly in my eye line and opened my email. Priya came by within the first 10 minutes. She said she was glad I was back. I said thank you, it was good to be back. She said if I needed anything, and I said I knew, thank you, and she went back to her desk. This exchange took 40 seconds and was kind, and I was grateful for it, and it cost me something I don't have precise language for. A small unit of the thing that was already running low. Marcus came by. He said glad you're here and asked about the Hendricks account. I answered the Hendricks account questions. He went back to his desk. This was better, the pivot to the account, and it cost less. The rest of the morning went in a series of similar small transactions. Some people came to my desk. Some caught me in the kitchen. One person, a woman from the floor above who I knew by sight and occasional elevator conversation, appeared at my desk just before lunch and said she'd heard and just wanted to say. She said just wanted to say, and then said it, the variation of the standard thing, and I received it with the standard response, thank you, that means a lot, and she went back upstairs and I looked at my screen. By noon I had said thank you 14 times in a work context, not counting email. I was counting without meaning to. The phone call from my aunt was at 7 in the evening. She calls infrequently, and when she does, the calls are long, structured around her updates and then mine, a format established decades ago. This call followed the format until the end, when she shifted into the register she'd been holding in reserve since the call began. I could hear it coming, a slight gathering before the turn. She said she'd been praying for me. She said the whole family had. I said that meant a lot. She said, you know, these things happen for a reason. I really believe that. I said, I know you do. She said, you were spared for something. I just feel that. I said, thank you, Aunt Claire. She said she loved me and I said I loved her, and we hung up and I set the phone down carefully on the table and sat with my hands in my lap. Spared for something. I turned the phrase over. It's a kind phrase. I understand its architecture, the way it takes a frightening randomness and gives it intention, makes the recipient of the luck into the recipient of a plan. I understand why people reach for it. I just can't reach back. What I said to her, all of it, was true enough. The love is true. The gratitude for the prayers is real in the sense that the caring behind them is real. I'm not performing falseness. I'm performing a version of the truth that's accessible to both of us, that fits the format, that allows the call to end with both parties intact. But there's a cost to the performance, and the cost is in the same place everything else has been going. That account I can feel drawing down. Reyes called on Tuesday and asked how I was feeling. I said pretty good. She said the party seemed to go well. I said it was really lovely. And it was, I want to be accurate. Lovely is the right word for what it was. She said she'd been thinking about me and wanted to make sure I wasn't just saying I was fine. I said I appreciated that. She said, but are you? I said, I'm managing. A pause. Then she said, that's different from fine. I said, yes, but it's accurate. She accepted this. We talked for another 10 minutes about ordinary things, her work, a show she was watching, a restaurant that had opened near her apartment. I asked questions and she answered them, and I was in the conversation, genuinely, and it was good to be in it. The ordinary register, the place where I wasn't the event. After we hung up, I sat on the couch and noticed that the conversation had taken something even while being good, even while being the kind of conversation I wanted to be in. And I couldn't figure out how to reconcile those two things, the wanting and the cost, so I didn't try to reconcile them. I turned on something to watch and watched it without retaining much. By the end of the week, I had a working vocabulary, a set of phrases that functioned, that fit the situations, that satisfied the requirement of the moment without demanding more than I had. It's been a process. I'm taking it one day at a time. I'm really lucky, I know that. People have been so kind. It means more than I can say. That last one I used frequently because it was true in a way I hadn't intended when I first said it. It did mean more than I could say. I just meant that in the inverse of how they heard it. Not abundance, but deficit. Not the feeling overflowing language, but the language outrunning the feeling. I said these things and people received them and were satisfied and moved on. And each time the exchange completed, I felt the small internal transaction, the unit leaving the account, and calculated in some background part of my mind how much remained and whether it would last the day. It always lasted the day, I want to be clear. I was not running empty in any way that showed. The account drew down and replenished overnight, not to full but to functional, and I showed up the next day and made the transactions, and by evening it was lower again. This is not a crisis. I don't experience it as a crisis. It's more like a budget I'm managing on a margin that's thinner than it used to be, for reasons I understand, with no immediate end to the expenditure in sight. On Saturday, I went to the grocery store. At the checkout, the cashier, a young man I'd seen there before without ever speaking to, looked at me and said, "How are you doing today?" The standard greeting, the formula, automated and kind and requiring nothing. I opened my mouth and the word fine was there, ready, the way it always was. I said it. He nodded and scanned my items. I paid and took my bags and walked out. In the parking lot, I stopped for a moment. Fine had cost nothing because it cost nothing with strangers, because the transaction was brief and the requirement minimal, and he hadn't meant it as a real question. But I stood there with my bags and noticed that I'd answered it the same way I answered everyone, the same prepared word, the same delivered tone, and that I couldn't immediately locate the line between the performance and whatever was under it anymore. That the gratitude I was supposed to feel, that I did feel somewhere in the form that was available to me, required active assembly each time. That I was building it fresh for each conversation, from components, the way you follow a recipe, measuring and combining and producing the correct result. That it did not arrive on its own, that arriving on its own was what it used to do. I shifted the bags in my hands and walked to my car and drove home and put the groceries away and stood in the kitchen for a moment before sitting down. The card from Reyes was still on the counter. 23 signatures, a small drawn sun. I looked at it and I understood, without drama and without surprise, that being grateful and finding gratitude easy were not the same thing, and that the distance between them was exactly as wide as I was tired. The second week was quieter, not silent. The phone still rang with some frequency, and the cards. There were more cards, a slow trickle of them arriving across the first 2 weeks from people at further distances, relatives and former colleagues, and one person I went to school with at 12, who had heard through some chain of transmission I couldn't reconstruct, kept coming, but the density of it had decreased. The event in other people's lives was becoming something that had happened, past tense, receding into the ordinary background of things they knew about me. Their attention had its own half-life, which is not a criticism. Attention always does. The world has a lot of things requiring it. I noticed the quieting the way you notice a sound stopping, the specific quality of air after noise. I sat in it. On Wednesday, I didn't go anywhere. I'd taken a personal day, the last of the ones I'd been managing around the appointments and the investigative interview and the various administrative requirements of the preceding weeks. I woke up and made coffee and stood at the window and looked at the street and understood that I had nowhere I was required to be until the following morning. I stayed in my sweatpants until 2 in the afternoon. I ate cereal for breakfast and then nothing until dinner, not because I wasn't hungry, but because assembling food required a sequence of decisions that I didn't have the interest for. I read some of a book I'd been reading in small increments, 2 or 3 pages at a time for the past month. I lay on the couch for a while and looked at the ceiling. The apartment was very quiet. The building made its sounds, pipes, the elevator, the couple upstairs whose footsteps I could track room to room. But the apartment itself was quiet, and I was quiet in it, and nobody needed anything from me for the first time in 2 weeks. I should have been relieved. I took stock of what I was instead and found something that didn't have a clean name. Something that sat at the bottom of the day like sediment, undisturbed now that the current had stopped. I had a body before this happened. I know this sounds self-evident. What I mean is that I had a body I didn't think about much, which is the ideal relationship with a body. The frictionless kind, where it does what it does, and you go about your life in it without particular notice. Sometime between the event and now, the body had become something I was aware of. Not in a medical sense. Nothing was wrong in the way that shows on a scan. The discharge papers had confirmed this. The follow-up appointment had confirmed it again. The checklist from the doctor's office had produced numbers within normal range. I was physically intact, which I understood and was grateful for in the inventory way I was grateful for most things now, checking and confirming the item and moving on. But the body was present in a way it hadn't been. Heavy in a specific way, not like illness, more like something that had been running very fast for a long time and had now stopped, and all the effort of the running had settled into the muscles and the joints as a kind of residue. I lay on the couch and felt this, the weight of my own arms, the effort of breathing, which I'd been noticing since well before the celebration, since before most things. The way my eyes wanted to close, not because I was sleepy, but because staying open required a small, continuous effort that I was tracking now. The event had required something of the body. I don't want to describe it because describing it would make it a scene, and it isn't a scene anymore. It's a fact, a prior fact, a thing that concluded and left this as its remainder. But it required something. The kind of requiring that bypasses normal channels, that goes directly into whatever system manages the unmanageable. And that system, I was understanding, was not infinite. It had run for a while. Through the discharge and the forms and the interviews and the calls and the party and the speeches and the cards. It had run while I said thank you and I know and I'm so lucky, and managed the expressions and assembled the gratitude and answered the questions. And now on the couch on the quiet Wednesday it seemed to have used what it had. Not collapsed, not broken, just used. I slept in the afternoon, which I don't usually do. Not a planned sleep, not a decision. I was reading the book and then I wasn't, and when I came back the light had changed later and lower and the book was on my chest and I had been somewhere else for an hour and 20 minutes without noticing the departure. I lay there after waking and felt the specific quality of that kind of sleep, the unintended kind that takes you all the way down without ceremony. I felt the weight of the couch under me, the particular compression of the cushion that had adjusted to my shape over years, the ceiling, the low light. I took inventory. Tired. Still tired. The sleep had been real and complete, and I was still tired underneath it. This was new information, presented plainly. I made dinner around 7. Pasta, the simple version, the one I make when the decision needs to be small. I stood at the stove and watched the water and breathed, and the breathing was the same as it had been, noticed, waited, the chest rising and falling with the mild deliberateness of something that used to be automatic. I ate at the table. The 2 cards were still on the counter, the cream envelope from Reyes and the one from work, overlapping slightly. The flowers from the party had mostly gone over, the petals of one beginning to drop, small circles of color on the counter around the glass. I hadn't thrown them out, not sentimentally, or not only sentimentally, mostly because it was another small sequence of decisions, the throwing out, the rinsing of the glass, the deciding where the glass went, and I was managing my sequences carefully. I ate the pasta and looked at the flowers and listened to the building. What I'd thought in the early days, was that there would be a point of rest on the other side of the immediate, a natural plateau where things would level out, and I could stand on the level ground and take stock and begin to locate what came next. This seemed logical. The acute part would pass and something more stable would follow. What I hadn't understood was that the acute part had been holding certain things up. The adrenaline, or whatever the body uses when it needs to exceed its normal capacity, had been structural. It had been weight-bearing. And when it finished, when the calls slowed and the party was cleaned up and the cards stopped coming and the quiet Wednesday arrived, what the adrenaline had been holding didn't find stable ground. It found me on a couch in sweatpants at 2 p.m, with my book on my chest. My sister texted at 8. "Just checking in," she said. "How was your day?" I said. "Quiet. Good quiet." She sent a heart. Then, "Rest if you can." I said I would. I put the phone down and looked at the room, the lamp on, the window dark, the gold balloon from the party, which Reyes had told me to keep if I wanted, and which I'd untied from the chair and moved to the corner, still mostly full, slightly less than when it arrived, settled now near the bookshelf with its ribbon coiled on the floor. I had thought the tiredness was a response. A reasonable temporary response, the kind that follows an unreasonable temporary event, the kind of tired that sleep addresses. Sitting in the quiet apartment, in the lamplight, with the pasta bowl in front of me and the drooping flowers on the counter and the balloon in the corner doing its slow adjusting, I revised this. The tiredness wasn't a response. It was a condition. Not permanent, perhaps. I didn't know enough to say permanent. But not temporary in the way I'd been assuming, the way you assume a fever is temporary, a thing the body runs through and exits. This was more like a new climate, a change in the baseline. The temperature of the place I lived now, which was different from the temperature of before, and which wasn't going to change back simply because the acute part was over and the cards had stopped coming and the room had gone quiet. I sat with this for a while. Not in distress. Not in crisis. Just in the plain, undramatic acknowledgement of a thing that was true. The balloon shifted slightly in the corner. The flowers dropped another petal. I was tired. And I was going to be tired tomorrow, and that was the information I had. My mother started a group chat. I discovered this on a Thursday morning when my phone produced a series of notifications in quick succession, a sound like something spilling. The chat contained my mother, my Aunt Claire, 2 cousins I speak to maybe twice a year, and my sister, who texted me separately within minutes to say, "Sorry, she asked me to add everyone." My mother had named the chat. The name was her way of marking occasions, earnest and unironic, and I won't reproduce it here because it belonged to her and she meant it wholly. What it communicated was that my survival was an ongoing event, a thing to be maintained and witnessed collectively, a group project. The first message was a photograph she'd found of me several years old at a family gathering. I'm laughing in it, turned towards someone outside the frame. My aunt replied with a heart. One cousin replied with 3 hearts. The other cousin replied with a sentence about how much I was loved. I put my phone face down and finished my coffee. Later, I sent a single heart into the chat, which satisfied the requirement. My mother replied immediately with 2 hearts and a sentence about calling me this weekend. I put the phone down again and went to work. A man named Robert, who I know through a mutual friend and have met perhaps 4 times, stopped me outside the hardware store on Saturday. He said he'd heard about what happened. He said he was so glad I was all right. He said, and this is close to verbatim because I've thought about it since, something like that really puts things in perspective, doesn't it? I said it does. He said, you must be seeing everything differently now. Everything must feel more. He paused, searching. I waited. He said, vivid. I said, it's been a process. He nodded with some satisfaction, as though process confirmed what he'd hoped, and then said he had to get going but that it was really good to see me and that I looked great. And he went into the hardware store. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Vivid. I turned the word over. I understood what he was reaching for, the idea that proximity to death clarifies life, sharpens the colors, makes the ordinary luminous. I've read this. I've heard it said. I understand the logic of it, and I don't think the people who say it are wrong that this sometimes happens. What I can report is what I actually see. The hardware store, ordinary in all its particulars. The sidewalk, a parking meter with 40 minutes remaining. A pigeon doing its uncomplicated work near the curb. None of it vivid. All of it just exactly what it is. I went in and bought the light bulbs I needed and went home. The therapist asked, in the 8th session, whether I'd noticed any shift in how I related to daily activities. I said, I noticed them more, but not in the way people seem to expect. She asked what way people expected. I said, grateful, luminous, like everything has been upgraded. People keep suggesting that I should feel as though I've been handed something. She said, and instead? I said, instead I feel as though I've been handed a job, the job of having survived. And the job has hours. It has requirements. People have expectations of the job holder, and I'm supposed to meet them, and I do meet them, mostly. But meeting them is work, and nobody mentions that it's work. She wrote something. I said, I don't think I'm depressed. She said, I know. Tell me more about the job. Dominique texted in the 3rd week to say she'd been thinking about me and to ask if I wanted to get coffee sometime. I said yes, that would be nice. We went on a Tuesday afternoon, a place near her office. We ordered and sat and talked, and it was, for the most part, the conversation I'd hoped for. The kind that moved around, covered ground, asked questions about her life as much as mine. She was easy company in the way I'd remembered from the former job. And then, about 40 minutes in, she said, I have to say, you seem so normal, like you just seem like yourself. I said, I am myself. She said, no, I know, I just mean. After something like that, I'd expect someone to be more. She paused. I said, more what? She said, I don't know, different, changed, you know? I said, it's still pretty recent. She nodded, and I could see her adjusting, recalibrating, and I could see underneath the adjustment the mild disappointment of someone who had expected a visible transformation and found instead a person ordering a medium coffee and asking about her sister in Lisbon. I didn't know how to give her the visible transformation. I didn't have one. Or if I had one, it wasn't visible in the way she was looking for. It wasn't the luminous kind, the vivid kind, the kind that Robert had been reaching for outside the hardware store. We finished our coffee. It was a good hour overall. I mean that. I walked home in the cold and thought about what she'd said and felt underneath the thinking, the familiar small transaction, the unit leaving the account. The group chat remained active. My mother posted into it with some regularity. Photographs mostly. Old ones. A project she'd apparently begun of scanning physical photographs from before the digital period. I appeared in several of them at various ages, and she captioned each one with something brief, usually just a year and a location, and the family responded with hearts and small observations. I understood what she was doing. She was building something, a record, an ongoing document of the fact that I existed across time. She was doing it because she'd had a period of not knowing whether the document would continue, and now that it was continuing, she was attending to it with a new care. This was love. Straightforwardly, this was love. I responded to each photograph with a heart, sometimes two, occasionally a sentence. Each response cost the same small amount. I paid it without resentment, but I paid it. Gil texted to ask if I wanted to come to his birthday dinner in the 4th week. A small group, he said. Nothing elaborate, he said. No pressure at all. I know you might not be up for it. That last sentence, I know you might not be up for it. I've been parsing the grammar of this kind of sentence for weeks now. The kindness in it is real. The accommodation is genuine. But built into the accommodation is an assumption that I am still 4 weeks out in a state requiring accommodation. That I am someone to whom normal invitations cannot be extended directly, without a door built in, without the acknowledgence that attending might exceed my current capacity. I said I'd love to come. He said, "Are you sure?" Really, no pressure. I said I was sure. The dinner was fine. Good, actually. 8 people around a table in a restaurant, good food, the ambient noise of a full room. I sat between someone I knew and someone I didn't, and talked to both of them and ate my dinner and drank 1 glass of wine and was, for most of the evening, simply a person at a birthday dinner. Twice, someone referenced what had happened. Once when I first arrived and one of the guests, meeting me for the first time with prior knowledge, said they were so glad I could come. Once near the end when Gil made a toast and included, briefly, a sentence about being grateful for everyone at the table and looked at me specifically when he said it. I received both with the vocabulary I developed. The smile, the nod, the small deflection back toward the room. On the walk to the train after, I felt the account balance. Lower than when I'd arrived, despite the evening being genuinely good, despite the food and the conversation, and the hour of being nobody's particular focus. The 2 references had cost more than the whole rest of the evening combined. I've been keeping a small internal record, not written down, just noted. How many times in a given day I perform the expected response. How many times I say some version of "I know I'm lucky." How many times I receive someone's relief and return it to them in a form they can use. How many times I hold the frame someone offers and hand it back polished. Some days the number is low and the account ends the day with something still in it. Some days I see Dennis in the hallway and Priya asks how I'm really doing, and my mother sends a photograph and Gil texts to check in, and my aunt comments in the group chat, and by evening I've made so many small transactions that I sit on the couch with nothing particular wrong and nothing particular to point to, and nothing to say except that I'm tired, in the specific way that has become my baseline. Not sad. Not broken. Not in need of intervention, just running on a margin that the performance keeps spending. And the performance doesn't end because the expectations don't end, because survival, it turns out, is not a moment other people move on from as quickly as they move on from other things. It stays present for them. They return to it. They find it meaningful and they want me to participate in the meaning regularly, to confirm it, to reflect it back to them in a form that tells them the thing they need to know. That it was worth it, that I'm glad, that every ordinary day feels like the gift they've decided it is. I do this. I do it reliably and without cruelty because they love me, and they are not wrong that I'm here, and that here is better than the alternative, and that there is something, somewhere in me, that knows this and means it when I say it. But meaning it, and finding it easy, are still not the same thing. And every morning I wake up and the day begins, and somewhere in the first hour I pick up the performance again, the way you pick up a bag you set down briefly. Not because anyone is making you, not because the bag is punishment, just because it belongs to you now and you go where it goes and it is heavy in the particular way of things, carried a long time. I pick it up. I carry it. I say what is expected. And I am tired, quietly, in a way that doesn't show, in a way that probably won't show tomorrow either, which is its own kind of survival, I suppose, though I've stopped calling it that out loud.